chairs by the Reverend Richard Young of St Matthew's at Useley.
Let us take just a few moments in quiet as we begin, as we reflect on the decisions to be made this evening and the manner in which we would wish to debate those matters, seeking God's grace and the wisdom and guidance of the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, you have called men and women to serve you through serving one another in all kinds of labours and endeavours. Look with favour on our nation and our communities in the midst of the opportunities and challenges that face us. We pray for those who exercise national and local leadership, especially for Her Majesty the Queen, for our Prime Minister, Government and Parliament. We pray your blessing on our borough of Hillingdon and all who live and work here. We thank you for all that is good in this place. We pray and give thanks for the work of our Mayor and our Mayoress, for all the councillors of this borough and for all those employed by the council. We pray for a vision of community which inspires our labours and for the use of our gifts in the service of all God's people. And so we commit this evening's proceedings, the work of this council and the well-being of the people of Hillingdon into God's loving care. Through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen.
Please be seated. Item 1 on the agenda, are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have apologies from Councillors Bliss, Lakmana, Lavery, Nelson and Sansapuri.
Thank you. Declarations of interest? Are there any? Thank you. Item 4, which is Mayor's announcements, very brief this
Mr. Mayor,
evening.
apologies, you've missed out the minutes.
Where were they? Item 2, to receive the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 16th of January. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Item 4, which is the Mayor's announcements, is very quick tonight. Just 2 dates for your diaries, which are the last 2 quiz nights for the Mayor's charities, the 24th of March and the 29th of April. The report of the Head of Democratic Services, Councillor Puddifoot.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, just before we call Councillor Puddifoot, I'd just like to point out for members one amendment on page 2 of the order of business. The management structure chart there is a change in the job title of the Director of Building Services, Infrastructure and Business Improvement from what was printed in the agenda. The word infrastructure has replaced the word transport. And just to confirm, the Mayor has agreed an additional item which is set out on page 4, waiver of 6-month council attendance rules. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 5, report of the Head of Democratic Services, Councillor Puddifoot.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are 4 parts to this report and I will deal with them each individually. The first item is to ask Council to note the use of urgency powers to implement a decision made as detailed in the report. I move that that decision be noted.
Is that seconded?
I second and reserve my right.
Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. Councillor Puddifoot.
The second part of the report is partly for the Council to note and partly to agree. Recommendation 2A is asking Council to note the new senior management structure that is expected to be implemented in full by the 1st of July this year. For avoidance of doubt, the Constitution delegates to myself as leader, in consultation with the Chief Executive, responsibility for the overall management structure of the Council. Accordingly, Council are asked to note the revised senior management structure as shown in Appendix A of this report. As a consequence of the management restructure, there will need to be some updating to other areas of the Constitution. Article 11, which sets out the Chief Officer roles, statutory officers and general allocation of responsibilities covering service areas, and Part 3 of the Constitution, scheme of delegation to officers, detailing powers delegated to the Chief Executive and Chief Officers and how they are sub-delegated to their staff. I move recommendations 2A and B.
Is that seconded?
I second and reserve my right.
Is that agreed? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The third part of the report deals with members' allowances for the year 2021. The Council is required to undertake an annual re-adoption of its allowance scheme, giving due regard to the recommendations made in the report of the Independent Panel for the Remuneration of Councillors in London. The panel reports every 4 years and last reported on recommended allowances for the year 2018-19. As regards the basic allowance, in 2018-19, the panel recommended the sum of £11,045, recognising that this is somewhat below the level of basic allowance paid elsewhere in the country, but feeling that it would be inappropriate to recommend an increase beyond the annual updating in line with staff pay awards. The Hillingdon scheme for 2018-19 was £11,036.71, and the recommendation for 2021 is £11,482.59. The starting point for special responsibility allowances is that recommended amount for the leader of the council, with all other allowances as a percentage of that sum. In 2014, the panel suggested that leaders of London boroughs should be paid an amount broadly equivalent to that of a backbench MP, which is now £79,468, plus a pension and a termination payment. Some hope. For 2018-19, the panel, whilst they still felt the allowance should be the same as that of an MP, recommended an allowance of £57,085. The Hillingdon figure at that time was £54,910.84, and the recommendation for 2021 is £57,129.14. Mr. Mayor, as we've done in past years, the administration will take responsibility for approving the basic allowance for councillors and for the special responsibility allowance attributed to councillors in the administration. The Labour Group will take responsibility for approving their own responsibility allowances. Accordingly, I move A, that the current members' allowance scheme is revoked at 31st March 2020, and that the basic allowance and special responsibility allowances numbers 1 to 16, as shown in Appendix B of the report, are approved. B, the Head of Democratic Services be authorised to increase the level of basic and special responsibility allowances in line with the annual pay to staff. I so move.
Is that seconded?
I formally second and reserve my right.
Is that agreed?
Agreed. Mr. Mayor, I formally move the adoption of special responsibility allowances numbers 17 to 21 as detailed in Appendix B, and we will request a recorded vote.
Is that seconded?
I formally second and reserve my
Thank
right.
you. Are there any other speakers on that? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. A recorded vote has been duly called for. So I will, for members of the public present, be asking each member in turn if they are in favour of recommendation B on the bottom of page 3, against or abstaining. Councillor Ahmad Walana. Abstain. Councillor Allen.
Howard.
Councillor Arnold. Councillor Bianco. Councillor Birra. Councillor Bridges. Councillor Brightman. Councillor Burrows. Councillor Chamdell. Councillor Chapman. Councillor Chubadar. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Cawthorne. Councillor Curling. Councillor Dennis. Councillor DeVille. Councillor Dillon. Councillor Dott. Councillor Duncan. Councillor Edwards. Councillor Edgington. Councillor Farley. Councillor Flynn. Councillor Fife. Councillor Gardner. Councillor Goddard. Councillor Graham. Councillor Hagger. Councillor Hensley. Councillor Higgins. Councillor Horangi. Councillor Kaufman. Councillor Lewis. Councillor McWanna. Councillor Markham. Councillor Mathers. Councillor Melvin. Councillor Milani. Councillor D. Mills. Councillor R. Mills. Councillor Money. Councillor Morgan. Councillor Morse. Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Oswell. Councillor Palmer. Councillor Prince. Councillor Puddifoot. Councillor Radia. Councillor Riley. Councillor Rodrigues. Councillor Seaman Digby. Councillor Simmons. Councillor Singh. Councillor Stead. Councillor Sweeting. Councillor Tuckwell. Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Mayor.
Abstain.
Mr. Mayor, that is carried.
Now we move on to the additional item. Councillor Puddifoot.
Mr Mayor, the final part of this report seeks council approval to allow Councillor Lackmana leave of absence from attending council meetings until the 11th of September. Unfortunately, Councillor Lackmana has been unwell, and I'm sure that all members will join me in wishing her a speedy recovery. I formally move recommendation 2.4 as shown on the order paper.
That's ended.
And I formally second and reserve my right.
Councillor Curling.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you to Council and yourself as well. I spoke with Councillor Lackmana just a couple of days ago, and although she has some more treatment to go through, she is recovering quite well, and I'm sure she will be back in this chamber fairly soon. So thank you. I'm sure she will be thankful for this on the agenda this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move the suspension of Council Procedure Rule 14.4 to allow unlimited speaking time for the mover and seconder of the motion and the principal speaker and seconder of the principal amendment from the Labour Group.
Is that seconded? Councillor Dennis?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to second this motion, but I reserve my right.
Thank you. Councillor Bianco.
Splendid. I feel I can hesitate. I've got the extra few seconds. Mr Mayor, it is again with great pleasure that I stand tonight to propose this administration's budget for the municipal year 2020-2021. In my budget speech last year, I reflected on many things, but in particular on the wise decisions made by our residents in May 2018 in re-electing this administration with an increased majority. This year, I must reflect again on the wisdom of our residents on their electoral choices, this time at the national level rather than the local one. Not only did we achieve the election of our very own Councillor David Simmons, in the north of the borough with an increased majority, but we were also able to ensure the return of the member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, also with an increased majority, in the face of stiff competition from, amongst others, Lord Buckethead, Count Binface, Elmo, and I nearly forgot Councillor Milani. Better still was the national picture, returning the aforesaid member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip to number 10, and the Conservatives to government with an 80-seat majority, and inflicting a fourth consecutive defeat on the Labour Party. I am persuaded perhaps to almost feel sorry for the member for Hayes and Harlington in his soon-to-be non-existent role of Shadow Chancellor. Mr Mayor, before I'm accused by anyone of going off-piste, may I say that my budget speech this year will focus on our plans for the year ahead, with some reference to the years beyond, whilst at the same time reflecting to some degree on what we have achieved in the year just ending. In past years, I have coined a number of terms to describe the administration's ethos, building on firm foundations being just one such term. Mr Mayor, I think it is now fair to say we have progressed somewhat in delivering our promises to the residents, so perhaps a more accurate turn of phrase might now acknowledge that the walls are up, the roof is on, and the fitting out complete. Mr Mayor, this administration is firmly in control of this council. Its finances remain sound, and we are continuing to deliver the services that our residents have come to expect. Mr Mayor, tonight's budget has been heralded to some degree already. Such is the nature of the reporting process required these days. However, I am sure that while some of you may have skimmed the 157 pages of fact-filled information, most will not. It rests with me, therefore, in the first place, and to our leader and my cabinet colleagues afterwards, to bring to our residents' attention the many important aspects of this budget and to explain the carefully thought out and interlinking nature of many of the provisions we have made. Mr. Mayor, I am pleased to report that we remain a much envied and admired local authority, certainly the envy of all our neighbours and to many further afield as well. We now have a solid track record of delivering on our promises. We are trusted by our residents to provide for their needs and to do so at a sensible cost to them. Nothing that I announce tonight is going to do anything but bolster that image. As I have definitely said before, despite continuing and ever-increasing challenges, we have delivered to our residents, we are delivering, and we will continue to deliver in the coming year. Mr. Mayor, all around us, councils have or will be shortly raising their council tax by the maximum allowed. This year, the maximum allowed is 2%, with a further 2% allowed for the social precept. Living within that cap is proving for many to be an almost impossible task. Most of our neighbouring councils are struggling to achieve this requirement and as a result are now teetering on the brink of bankruptcy, with balances falling to dangerously low levels and threats of Section 114 notices being made left, and left. In Ealing, balances are now down to 15 million, and their Section 114 officer has warned that no further drawdowns can be made. In Harrow, balances have dropped to just 10 million, with a similar warning being made to them. In Hounslow, balances are also just 10 million. By comparison, Hillingdon has balances standing at more than 34 million. Mr. Mayor, prudence should be our middle name. It will come as no surprise to any of you listening that all these authorities are raising their tax by the absolute maximum allowable, which is always the default Labour approach to taxation. After all, it's always easy spending somebody else's money. In Hillingdon, while we are proposing an increase this year, our increase will sit at no more than 90% of those of our neighbours, much the same approach we take with all our fees and charges. So for full taxpayers, the increase this year will be 1.8% on council tax. However, if you are over 65, or more precisely someone in your household is over 65, then there will be no increase in council tax for the 14th year running. Mr. Mayor, if you were lucky enough to turn 65 in 2006, then whilst you'd now be pushing 80, your council tax bill from Hillingdon won't have changed one penny. For those under this magic age threshold, however, this is only the second increase in 12 years. We are this year, for the first time, also going to collect the social service precept of 2%. Whilst this precept has been available to us for the last 4 years, and all our neighbours have taken it every year, we have not done so until now. This means that this year, on the doorstep, the Hillingdon increase will be 3.8%. However, our residents do also have to pay the mayoral precept, over which we unfortunately have no control. This year, the Mayor of London is raising his charges again by a further 3.6%. This makes a total increase over his 3.5-year reign, to over 12.5%. An increase every year since he took office and he took over from Boris. Mayor Khan is happy to follow the Labour maxim of taxing and spending, following in the very footsteps of Ken Livingstone. Mr. Mayor, to add further context to these percentages, you might be tempted to ask where the Band D level equivalent sits between us and our neighbouring boroughs. Having just heard the figures I've mentioned, relating to both the state of their balances and the increases in council tax they are proposing, you might be forgiven for thinking that the reason these councils are all in the cart is because they don't raise as much through their council tax as we do. If you did think this, you'd unfortunately be completely mistaken. The Band D level in Ealing this year will sit at £1,571. In Hounslow, it will be £1,607, and in Harrow a whopping £1,854. These all compare to the Hillingdon level of just £1,515. Our Band D is lower than Ealing by £56, lower than Hounslow by £92, and lower than Harrow by £339. It just goes to prove, Mr. Mayor, for sensible charges, value for money and outstanding services, just come to live in Hillingdon. And Mr. Mayor, I haven't even mentioned green flags yet. Mr. Mayor, as you know, there is more to a budget than just the headline figures. Residents need to know what they are going to get for their hard-earned money. This is not a one-way street, at least not in Hillingdon. We pride ourselves in delivering first-class services in return for our residents' council tax payments. And just in case anyone has forgotten, we still have 17 libraries, now with a new programme of refurbishment having started again. We still have 30 minutes free parking for all and special discounts for our residents. We still have a brown badge scheme for the over 65s. We still have free allotments and free swimming for the over 65s. We still have free burglar alarms for the over 65s, and more than 10,000 have now been delivered. We still have free garden waste collections for all. We have free bulky goods collections for all. We have weekly refuse collections for all, and we have 55 green flags, the most anywhere in the world. Mr. Mayor, there are no service cuts at all in Hillingdon. Let me repeat, this year there are no service cuts at all in Hillingdon. Loving a bit of context as I do, Mr. Mayor, did you know that in Ealing they only have 6 libraries still open? Did you know that garden waste bins in Ealing now cost £79 each? And did you know that in Hounslow they have stopped locking their parks at night, creating a problem for behavioural issues, and they have cut their daycare services and stopped early support for children with complex needs completely? In Ealing, even dying costs 12% more this year, Mr. Mayor. A grave in Ealing now costs £4,580, an increase of £490 in a year. This compares to just £2,544 in Hillingdon. Car parking charges have also gone up in Ealing again, in some cases by 33%. In Hillingdon, car parking charges are not increasing this year. In Harrow, it's a calamity wherever you look. They haven't even been able to make this year's savings targets, so what hope do they have for the new year? They are dipping into reserves, and yet they have no idea how to make next year's savings targets, which are even greater. Mr. Mayor, returning to Hillingdon, what will our residents see for their money this year? Well, in addition to the list I have mentioned of existing services we are continuing to provide, we have set aside $677,000 for new growth items, and these include, not exclusively, $130,000 for 3 new antisocial behaviour officers, $113,000 for an additional planning lawyer, $100,000 for a live interpretation display for the Battle of Britain bunker, $60,000 for patrol officers at Little Britain Lake, $56,000 for a military history curator for the bunker and across the borough, $50,000 for additional domestic violence support. Of course, there are many other areas of this budget that deserve a mention and some explanation if we are to convince our residents that we have a tight grip on their money and will spend it wisely. Coupled with our spendings plan, therefore, is our savings programme. This year we expect to make savings of slightly in excess of £6 million. These savings will be made across the council, and bearing in mind we have always met our previous savings targets, we are comfortable that we can do so again this year. The largest areas of savings will come from the continuation of what we call service transformation. Put simply, it is by reviewing how we do things to make our processes more efficient that we achieve these savings. In many cases, savings initiatives started in one year will grow in future years when the full year effect of these measures come into force. Further savings are made through our bid process, and furthermore, income generation also forms a part of this process. Mr Mayor, councils generate income through many activities. Hillingdon is no exception. However, for some years now, we have benchmarked our fees and charges at no more than 90% of those of our neighbouring boroughs. I should emphasise that this is a maximum figure, and seeing the increases that our neighbours are putting in place this year, it is worth noting that in many cases our charges will be well below the 90% level. When we increase our charges, we aim to do so on a modest basis. Mr Mayor, as I have already mentioned, our car parking charges will not increase this year, meaning that we will remain one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest borough for parking in London, and the only one to give our residents a special discount. Where else can you park for an hour for only 20p? Alongside the council's revenue budget sits our capital budget. The difference between the two budgets is often unclear to our residents and indeed of little real interest to them. However, it is through the capital programme that most of our significant expenditure takes place, particularly on big ticket items such as buildings, vehicles and major construction projects. As you will know, this administration has been very concerned on behalf of our residents at the closure of Uxbridge Police Station. Its closure is a needless and unnecessary act by the Mayor of London under the banner of saving money. There will be no savings from this action. The cost of bringing Hayes Police Station up to scratch will wipe out any savings made by closing Uxbridge. And the extra distances the police will have to travel to cover the borough will have a negative impact on service delivery. The Mayor's plan leaves the borough with one operating station nowhere near the centre of the population. As my colleague Councillor Mills has previously stated, it is quicker for a member of the public living in the north of the borough wishing to go to a police station by public transport to go to Scotland Yard than it is to go to Hayes. Our renewed offer to buy the police station in Uxbridge remains on the table in the unlikely event the Mayor sees sense. Of course, if the Mayor of London had actually come to Hillingdon, even once during his tenure, he would perhaps have understood the issues more clearly. Even more bizarre is the fact that the Prime Minister has now confirmed that police numbers will increase, and this will put more pressure on the police to find suitable accommodation. A solution is staring Mr Khan in the face. But can he see it? Mr Mayor, turning to other issues, next year we will spend £4.8 million on capital works to our buildings. This will improve, modernise, make better fit for purpose many of the buildings we use. Over the last few years, we have invested significant money in the buildings occupied by our uniformed youth groups, Scouts, Guides and the like. Going forward this year, whilst this investment will continue, we are keen to expand our support for other youth sports clubs. In November 2018, I was fortunate enough to be with the then Mayor, Councillor Morgan, at the opening of the new clubhouse we provided for the Explorers Football Club on Sipson Rec. The reception we were given that day by the kids and their parents and local supporters showed just how popular support of this nature can be and how it can really make the difference, enabling a club to thrive. We are allocating £3.75 million towards helping clubs with capital expenditure for their buildings and pitches and courts. Also in the south of the borough, about as far south as we can go, Cranford Park is one of our finest open spaces. We are currently at stage 2 in the bidding process for funding from the National Heritage Lottery to undertake improvements and to save historic elements of the house that once stood on the site. We are allocating £2.5 million towards this project. This civic centre remains at the heart of what we do, and it continues to require investment to keep it running efficiently. The members will have recently enjoyed the benefits of the 2 new lifts in the members section, and this is works we're going to have to carry out through the remainder of the building. We will invest £2.4 million this year towards their upkeep. Mr Mayor, a council's duties go far and wide, and not all of them are for the benefit of the living. Therefore, next year we will invest £1.2 million in the refurbishment and extension of the Uxbridge mortuary. We will invest £2.1 million in environmental projects, including works on a number of our cemeteries. And at the other end of the life scales, we will provide pollution screens at a number of our schools. We will invest £2 million in shopping parade initiatives to follow on from the very successful scheme run by the previous Mayor of London. Mr. Mayor, our roads are the best surfaced in London and probably the UK, and we also have the lowest accident rates in London. We will continue this investment. We will also continue our work to highlight the very real and recent history of this borough with further investment in our bunker and visitors centre, and make it available to the wider public so that they can both enjoy and pay respect to the generations who have gone before and to those who fought for this country to ensure that we enjoy the freedom and peace that we have today. Mr. Mayor, we will upgrade our CCTV system with a further investment of $342,000, invest $640,000 in renewing parts of our vehicle fleet, replacing older, less environmentally friendly vehicles with new, cleaner ones. Part of our commitment to reduce the impact of climate change. Mr. Mayor, I have touched on some of the commitments we are planning for the coming year. I am sure my colleagues will highlight more in their areas of responsibility when they speak later. I haven't yet mentioned our continuing secondary school expansion programme, nor the new leisure centre planned for Useley. Although I do have to say, contrary to what some may say, there does seem to be a lot going on in the south of the borough this year. Mr. Mayor, part of the budget that I will move tonight relates to specific areas of council activity. The first is the housing revenue account. The HRA is a ring-fenced self-financing account. Next year, rental income from the council's tenants will produce $57 million, and we will spend some $18.7 million on investment into our stock. Rent increases are set by statute, and will this year revert to the formula of CPI, Consumer Price Index, plus 1%. Over the next 4-year period, we anticipate investing circa $137 million in our housing stock, or in new housing, to provide 495 units of stock, as well as maintaining appropriate levels of reserves to hold against unforeseen expenditure. I expect my colleagues to expand on this brief summary when they speak. The last significant part of this equation is the schools budget. Again, the DSG is a ring-fenced budget. However, as I'm sure others will expand, there is currently a deficit running on the account which will accelerate this year, entirely due to the increase in the higher needs demand. We forecast that by the end of the year, this deficit will reach just over 20 million. We have, as many will know, we have applied to the Secretary of State to disaggregate this sum, and that request has been rejected. But what remains clear is that this is not just a Hillingdon problem, but rather a nationwide issue, which needs to be addressed centrally. We will continue to press central government to address this matter. Mr. Mayor, this budget proposal is a robust piece of work that the residents of this borough can have faith will deliver the services they require and want. This council is in good shape to provide the support to our communities that they deserve, and our residents can be sure we will come through for them. This budget is the work of many. It is formed through careful planning, expedient execution of actions throughout the year leading up to this date, and by the hard work of many officers of this council, who I would like to thank for their dedication. In particular, my thanks must go to the Director of Finance and his team for pulling this all together, and also, of course, to the Leader of the Council for his vision and steely determination to deliver our promises. Mr. Mayor, the year ahead looks more settled in some areas and more uncertain in others, much like every year. This council and this Conservative administration will deliver once again on its promises to the residents of the borough, as we once again put our residents first in all our actions over the coming year. Mr. Mayor, if you are ever in any doubt, and I very much doubt that, Hillingdon is the only borough to live in London, if not in the UK, and I can only say to those who are not fortunate enough to live here yet, there's always time to move. Mr. Mayor, I am pleased to formally move this budget and the recommendations listed at the bottom of page 5, 6, 7 and 8 of the Green Order paper. Mr. Mayor, I so move.
Is there a seconder?
Mr Mayor, I second and reserve my right.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers? Mr Mathers, Councillor Mathers, should I say.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First of all, can I thank the officers for their support and hard working on helping myself and others in the Labour Group in preparing this amendment, particularly the finance team and the Labour Group office staff. Mr Mayor, I propose this amendment as shown in the Green Paper on behalf of the Labour Group. The Labour amendment makes Hillingdon safer. This Labour amendment makes Hillingdon fairer, and this Labour amendment makes Hillingdon more sustainable. Financial sustainability is more important than ever after years of cuts from Conservative-led governments taking 60p away from every £1 given to councils. And looking at our current government, it is clear austerity is not over. Boris has not yet arrived with a big bag of cash to bail out our local Conservative-led council, and likely never will. So we on this side have to be realistic. This amendment is realistic. This Conservative administration in their budget have spent over £6 million in reserves this year and are planning to do nearly 10 more in the medium term. Our amendment over the medium term reduces this unsustainable dent in our reserves, putting £2.5 million back in by 24-25. This council has had to make cuts of nearly £42 million by 22-23, and £20 million more of these cuts are still to be identified. Finances are not sound. There have been cuts to services as more demand falls on less officers in each service. We have seen our universal youth services all but disappear, waterways blocked and paths left unmaintained despite their green flags. Significant delays in education, health and care plans, which families and schools alike rely on to ensure their children have the appropriate support they need to grow and thrive and reach their potential in their education. Our children's centres, vital to increase life chances and opportunities for the under fives, are going through the second restructure in as many years to cut staff. Residents are noticing the difference in the service they receive. Our amendment sustainably invests in areas where residents are concerned and where we need relief from these Conservative cuts. We are proposing to invest $49,000 to increase special needs and disabilities teams to support the demanding growth of SEND cases within the borough. Equally investing $146,000 to recruit 2 additional education psychologists to support in the EHCP process. To support teenagers, this proposal recommends an investment of nearly $200,000 for a 15% increase in the current Universal Youth Service offer. This to provide an opportunity for those workers to reach out into the community, to get to know them, to have the ability for them to really understand the community needs and address those needs within their youth centres. It would also enable us to resolve the gap in recruitment and increase retention, as longer contracts enable more work to be done, providing better job satisfaction and a greater connection with the community in which the youth officers work. In addition, we'll be building community safety through more police officers, discounting camera-style doorbells, recruiting green spaces and waterways patrol officers, installing CCTV in council housing blocks and extending burglar alarms to council properties, protecting our paying residents, tenants and protecting our residents. It's easy to say no service cuts when you throw the budget aside each year. It's part of the bid process, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's easy to say that there may be walls and a roof and maybe even some windows, but as you go inside the building, it is bare. This amendment that makes difficult decisions to ensure our services are financially responsibly delivered recognises that our policy benchmark, the Conservative administration's policy benchmark of raising council tax to 90% of the London average is outdated. This political gimmick adds very little value to our residents. We are proposing a slight increase of 0.19% to the budget's 1.8 council tax proposal, which would raise £222,000. This will fund the educational psychologists and expand the SEND team, as previously mentioned. We believe that residents will understand the value of investing in the borough's education for children. For an additional 4p per week for the average band, for the Band D household, 4p per household per week. This is in line with other councils at 1.99% in Buckinghamshire, Surrey, as well as Windsor and Maidenhead. As well as being financially responsible, the Labour amendment also protects those on the lowest incomes, ensuring those eligible for the council tax reduction scheme, along with the over 65, have their council tax frozen. This amendment also includes provision for care leavers as they move into adulthood, exempting this group from the cost of council tax up to the age of 25. Many of us here have extended family who could support us, or had extended family who support us, as we transitioned into adulthood and lived independently. We here are the corporate parents of those under 18 in care, and therefore akin to their extended family as they become young adults. We have a moral obligation to support them in their independence, as well as a financial one. This amendment also addresses the unsustainable capital borrowing this Conservative administration is committing us to. Capital programme funding strategy relies just way too much on prudential borrowing. There are better ways to phrase that, but effectively the prudential borrowing is overwhelming the council's finances in the years to come. Borrow from tomorrow to fund the gaps in today. The council intends to borrow an additional £200 million by 2025 on top of the £45 million this year. For every £10 million we have to find £575,000 from our revenue budget to service the debt, meaning more cuts, lowering reserves to dangerous levels, putting at risk the library, the weekly bin collections and other services Hillingdon residents do enjoy. To invest in the pressure on vital services, the Labour group has had to make some tough decisions, as should the Conservative administration. And we are proposing reducing the spend on the Battle of Britain bunker in terms of the live interpretation and the military history curator, as well as some of the enhancements in our capital programme. We are not, however, removing all of the spend on the Battle of Britain bunker, for this attraction needs some improvements such as flood proofing. The Battle of Britain bunker represents a proud moment in our borough's history. It is also a welcome education point, promoting the importance of peace and a reminder of those who gave their lives. It should be enjoyed by Hillingdon residents, and we do hope it continues to be promoted. However, the council has invested significant capital amounts over recent years and continues to provide over £500,000 each year to operate it. The Labour group do feel that this income could be maximised, that investment could be made if maybe the Battle of Britain bunker was made a charity. It could have relied many years ago on lottery funding, just as other things are doing this time. So in light of this, as much as it is a good attraction, the pressure on our finances doesn't enable us to be able to borrow endlessly. We don't want to see our investment in attractions across the board, in our heritage across the board, be at risk. Instead, we want to sustain all heritage sites and the other things that Hillingdon residents receive by being prudent. Therefore, to ensure that we're not stuck in a borrowing black hole, the budget amendment that we propose removes the new £44 million theatre from the capital programme. Something has to give in the capital programme. The servicing of debt will overwhelm the council in future years, and it will not be able to sustain its services. introducing, as I said, many more cuts, most likely. The proposed new theatre is a premature pipe dream that does not support the sustainability of our local theatres, but in fact threatens their viability. This is a vanity project, and unfortunately for those residents in St Andrews, I suspect, just as with other developments for amenities in local areas, they have not been consulted and asked what they would like. I suspect they will wonder where the seal money has gone, which could fund such amenities. It is time to consult the community, and particularly this community, in what they would like to build within a more affordable budget. It's time to use the seal money afforded to them in the areas where it comes from. The proposed changes to the capital programme discussed below reduce capital finances cost this year at 61,000 and increase to 2.5 million by 2024-25. This amendment will temporarily increase the drawdown from general balances by some £500,000, but this will come back in years to come and is still well within the use of reserves that we've seen that were proposed originally. But this amendment isn't just financially sustainable, it's also built on environmental sustainability too. The urban tree challenge has been taken up by many local authorities, the opportunity to plant trees in very, very highly polluted areas. And if Hillingdon needed anything, it needs more trees in densely populated or high polluting areas. Our proposal provides an investment from the council in order to plant an initial 1,000 trees in areas of the lowest air quality, matching the funding stream from the government. It also places the money for a feasibility for solar panels or other self-generating renewable sources on council-owned assets, providing a sustainable future in terms of energy usage and environmental impact, but also enabling the council to reduce its costs, its revenue costs in the future, through the production of greener energy and reducing those electricity bills. We're also proposing drinking fountains similar to those in parks at the moment, but in high streets, to encourage the promotion of people using bottles such as this to fill their water as they go, rather than buying plastic bottles from the high street. We also are recommended an accelerated investment in old pre-condensing boilers, that they be replaced in order to help bill payers in the council properties, but also to reduce the carbon footprint of the council's housing stock. Mr Mayor, Hillingdon People does add some value in terms of giving residents who have no access to online materials information, but the issues per annum that are delivered are above the recommended amount, and its printing has a significant environmental impact, and we wish to reduce this by reducing the number of issues each year to 3 per annum, which also enables a saving of 40,000 and supports the urban tree challenge costs. Mr Mayor, this Labour amendment is more sustainable. It gives warning and provides an alternative to the Conservative administration's approach to going down a boring black hole. It provides more sustainable investment in our children's education, in our young people, in our community safety and cohesion. It provides sustainable action in terms of improving the environment. Mr Mayor, I propose this amendment for a safer, fairer and sustainable Hillingdon.
Thank you, Councillor Mathers. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I too would like to thank officers for all their hard work and preparation in the main budget and in this amendment. It seems there are no students to thank this year. I blame Councillor Bianco for that in his speeches last year. It was nothing to do with me. Mr Mayor, the end of austerity, he said. I'm not sure which Chancellor now said that, as we've had so many since the last budget setting. It's not quite the end of austerity though, is it? The budget reflects that, and each year it becomes harder to fund services our residents deserve. And that's why some tough decisions have to be made, as Councillor Mathers includes in his amendment. Borrowing seems to be a new addiction, and it can be prudent to borrow, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dillon, can I just ask you, can you speak up? I'm having difficulty actually hearing you.
It's okay.
I don't want to put you off, but if you could just shout
I can
a bit
start
more.
again if everyone wants me to. No. There was a
No, I
speech
didn't
by
mean that, Councillor Dillon.
Councillor Bianco's speech last year. No, it's okay. Borrowing seems to be the new addiction. It can be prudent to borrow, Mr. Mayor, but when we need to meet the needs of our residents, and to borrow for sensible infrastructure projects, it's also okay to borrow ideas from the Labour amendments of years gone by. For example, in 2018, Labour proposed a 100,000 initiative to tackle fly tipping, and then in 2019, the main budget included a 140,000 fly tipping response and prosecution unit. Antisocial behaviours were proposed in our amendments in 2017 and 2018, and this year we see 130 for 3 new ASBET officers. A landlord licensing scheme for HMOs in a ward could also be thought to have been borrowed. It goes on, Mr. Mayor. One could say, when the Prime Minister watched last year's budget setting, he listened to us. Increased spending on police. What a genius idea. Well, one could say that was borrowed, but I'm not quite sure Mr. Johnson actually borrowed or watched that speech. I'm positive we will see some of these practical ways to improve the needs of our residents to create a safer Hillingdon in the future. Mr. Mayor, this amendment is making our borough safer through green spaces and waterways patrol officers, increasing the remit beyond Little Britain Lake, while also reducing the cost to $56,000, recognising that a number of waterways and green spaces experience fly tipping, antisocial behaviour and other local infringements. The broader remit of these officers will better support the wider borough, going where there is need rather than focus on one area. Our ASBET team currently is too stretched to deal with all of these issues, so it's a better use of the resource. Safer through police officers. 114,000 will fund 2 additional police officers for the borough, with a discount from the Mayor of London through the MPS Partner Plus scheme that allows local authorities to purchase additional constables for their areas at a discounted rate of $57,000 per constable to improve security and reduce crime within the borough. Mr. Mayor, we all know the government has promised additional officers, and sure we will see some in our borough over the coming years, but they won't be enough. Ask yourself this: do our residents feel safer, or will they feel safer with more residents? Much was made of this suggestion last year, and I haven't seen any crime figures to suggest the need isn't there. Safer through funding a 10% discount of camera-style doorbells and a PIR cameras for residents. Camera doorbells offer added protection for residents. Many are purchasing those, and they will help safeguard the vulnerable. The purchase of a discount code from the supplier that will be available to Hillingdon residents will help the borough to protect the vulnerable and reduce crime, with $55,000 sufficient to fund $2,500 of discounts for residents of each of the council's 22 wards. A scheme that would ensure our residents feel safe within their homes as on our streets. Safer for the council tenants who pay us rent and to whom we have a duty of care alongside the security of the property. By introducing CCTV cameras to all council housing blocks, currently 10% of the council housing blocks have had CCTV installed. With this proposed investment, we aim to increase the offer to the remaining 400 sites to increase safety and reduce crime. Invest to save, Mr. Mayor. By extension of a free burglar alarm offer, it is proposed that the free burglar alarm scheme currently available to over 65s is extended to include all HRA property to help protect the council's housing stock. Once again, making our residents feel safer in their homes. Safer by bringing communities together through the introduction of a small grants fund for celebrating diversity. Supporting local groups to organise events that celebrate the diversity within the borough, such as Black History Month and LGBTI Pride. Further strengthening social inclusion and community cohesion at a cost of $10,000. Mr Mayor, I'm very proud to second an amendment that not only works for our residents, but also for our finances. A truly safer, fairer and sustainable Hillingdon. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Well, Mr Mayor, if I may, just for clarification, we are now have an amendment to the budget recommendation moved by Councillor Mathers, seconded by Councillor Dillon, set out on the bottom of page 8 through to page 13, and everybody speaking on that when I was speaking on the amendment. Just to remind everybody, we're back to 3 minutes per speaker now. Thank you.
Councillor Sweeting.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In the wake of Storm Dennis, the excellent SEND team is also in the midst of its own perfect storm. It has been buffeted during 2019 by its complete reorganisation. It is being faced with a huge increase in the number of vulnerable children needing completion of their education, health and care plans. It is being pressed by schools to complete these plans within 20 weeks and is confronted with the task of finding places for these vulnerable children in Hillingdon schools when the council has actually woefully failed to increase in time the number of special school places, and it is faced with the ever more expensive transport costs as the council has to use expensive out-borough schools to meet local need. The council is now seeking to decrease the number of plans delivered by suggesting that early years support funded by schools could deliver fewer plans. This, when hovering over the team, is the huge deficit in high needs budget of some 30 million and going up, brought about by central government policies which were not funded. Councils are expected to complete assessments in 20 weeks. The team, unfortunately, has fallen far short of this, as for 2018, just 54 were completed in the time, which put Hillingdon 28th out of 33 London boroughs. The impact has been that children have been stuck in limbo in schools for which they are unsuited, and schools having to use their tight budgets to support these children's special needs. The small amount of additional funds recently coming from the council to help plug the funding gap is actually just like a sandbag being used to plug a massive hole in the dike. The storm clouds over this service continue due to central government refusing recently to allow Hillingdon to raise school budgets to help to reduce an enormous deficit. However, in the midst of all of this salami slicing of services are children, Hillingdon children who deserve far better. So I suggest that just a little more capacity in the SEND team would indeed provide a welcome interlude from the battering which this service has endured and is still enduring. Please support this amendment to the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you may have guessed, I'm speaking in favour of the amendment, and in particular the proposals regarding the capital expenditure through the housing revenue account. Can I remind you that at the council meeting last month, the whole council supported the declaration of a global climate emergency. But notwithstanding that decision, there was no change to the budget for the coming year, which we are now debating. The fact is that a simple way of making progress to address the emergency would be to replace all the remaining non-condensing boilers in council residential properties. Such modern boilers are between 10 and 15% more efficient, so replacing the roughly 1,600 old boilers would have a significant saving of gas consumption and the resulting CO2 emissions. I should add that at the current renewal rate, the council would take more than 5 or 6 years to accomplish this task. But not only would this be a small step in helping the planet, it would also assist those tenants, many of whom are in fuel poverty. There are cases of which all councillors will be aware of tenants, often old or unwell, finding that maintaining the recommended temperature at home is just too expensive, and that risks making their health condition worse. So there are now 2 reasons to take this action. Additionally, replacing those boilers, all of which are more than 15 years old, will reduce the revenue costs of maintenance and the risks of failure, no heat or hot water for the tenants. But you might ask, why do it now? Well, there is a rumour that there could be a shortage of plumbers in 2021 and afterwards, due to the requirement for European workers to pay for a visa and pay an annual amount for health cover, despite being liable to UK tax and national insurance contributions. So that will lead to higher costs in the future. So taking the action this coming council year would be good for 4 reasons: reducing gas consumption and emissions, reducing fuel poverty, reducing boiler failures, and saving money. Therefore, I ask you to support this proposal, which achieves so much for a safer, fairer and sustainable Hillingdon. Please support this amendment.
Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In Hillingdon, some schools and trusts have seen an increase in children with special needs, some as many as 11%. Sometimes the children can attend a mainstream school and, if they are properly supported, can do well. This does not apply to all children with special needs, however, and some need to be educated in a special school with specially trained staff and facilities suitable for their needs. In order to secure a place in a special school of this nature, a child must be assessed by an educational psychologist. It takes 20 weeks for the educational psychologist to do an assessment of a child and produce an Education, Health and Care Plan, or EHCP. Without an EHCP, a child will not be placed in a special school or receive the specialist care and education he or she needs. In Hillingdon, the percentage of children with special needs has been increasing slowly but steadily. In 2010, there were 2.8% of children with an EHCP in Hillingdon. In 2019, this had risen to 3.7%. Some areas and schools were affected more than others. In Hillingdon, in 2015, 96.5% of EHCPs were issued within 20 weeks. In 2016, this had risen to 98.3%. But in 2017, there was a dramatic fall to 64% and a further fall to 54.9% in 2018, the last published figures. The figures for 2019 will not be published until May, but I understand that they remain in the 50-something percentage area. This is not sustainable or acceptable, and something must be done to recognise this situation and correct it. Children with special needs should be assessed in good time within a 20-week period and a special school place provided for them. By not assessing almost 50% of children with special needs in good time, we're not only failing them, but all other children. Teachers may often have to give a disproportionate amount of time to these children and less to the education of other mainstream children. Keeping children with special needs safe has also resulted in teachers so injured they have needed hospital treatment, which again is unacceptable. The Labour group is proposing that 2 additional educational psychologists be employed to help with the assessment of children in need of an EHCP. The private providers of this service are not always flexible in meeting need. If Hillingdon Council did this, it could make a very positive impact on this situation and improve outcomes for many, many children in the borough, both in need of mainstream as well as special education. This would help to provide a safer, fairer and more sustainable service for all Hillingdon children. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just showing 2 other speakers, the first of which is Councillor Money.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the last full council, a motion was unanimously passed to declare a climate emergency, and a target was set for this borough to become carbon neutral by 2030. Members in this chamber will be pleased to see that the Labour Group's amendments include many green initiatives that will be relatively cost effective and have a significant impact on residents' lives. It has been well documented that air pollution shortens life expectancy, disproportionately impacting those most vulnerable. And while the issue of air quality is a top priority for public health in London, some wards in our borough have the highest level of air pollution in the whole of England. On top of this, we have the threat of the third runway and the ongoing works for HS2, which may as well be called a deforestation project. Therefore, we believe that every action and decision taken by this council should be towards a greener and cleaner environment. In order to reduce air pollution and improve air quality, we begin with proposing the council apply for funding from the government's Urban Tree Challenge to purchase 1,000 trees and plant them in areas with the lowest air quality. Our neighbours, Slough, are planting more than 8,000 trees. Along with this, we are also proposing a feasibility study for solar panels on the council buildings to provide greener energy. The council has spent money on reusable cups in this borough, in this chamber, and residents in this borough also use reusable flasks to drink water and coffee. To expand on these positive steps, the council's water fountain programme should also have further investment with the introduction of water fountains in high streets. This will help reduce the amount of single-use plastic bottles. We are also proposing the acceleration for the replacement of boilers in the council housing stock to more efficient boilers. We are proposing a budget this year that has many practical amendments aimed to support our residents for a safer, fairer and more sustainable Hillingdon. If our practical amendments are not agreed upon this year, we will have to wait another year to see them in the Conservative budget. It will be very unfortunate for our residents. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be supporting this amendment and I hope everyone in this chamber will also show support.
Councillor Curling.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Labour Group believes in maximising the number of police officers in the borough. More bobbies on the beat and an increased police presence in our communities is vital to ensure that our residents feel safe and there's a deterrent to criminal activity. The borough already contribute to extra officers, so our proposal to fund an extra 2 officers over and above that we already fund should not be a controversial matter or one that is unacceptable to the administration. Fly tipping, litter and antisocial behaviour are all real problems across the borough and especially in our green spaces and waterways. So whilst we wish to protect areas such as Little Britain Lake, we consider this to be a bigger problem than one confined to one specific area. We are therefore proposing a peripatetic green spaces and waterways patrol officer, and this will allow for the worst hit areas of our green spaces and waterways to be regularly patrolled and will allow us to forge better links with other agencies such as the Environment Agency, the Canal and Rivers Trust, as well as establishing a network of dog walkers, geocachers and any other responsible users of our green spaces and waterways. Mr. Mayor, video doorbells have become more popular over the last year or so with many benefits, especially for older and more vulnerable residents, as well as adding a level of security for everyone. The OWL database of video doorbells and CCTV also adds an element of electronic neighbourhood watch. We therefore believe that the council should encourage residents to contribute to the borough's community safety as well as their own by providing Hillingdon video doorbells and PIR camera discount scheme. There are now a number of different manufacturers and systems available which could make this a more competitive and varied offer and provide value for money as well as a level of security for both residents and the council. Mr. Mayor, in these amendments we're not proposing any grand political gestures, playing politics with the safety of our residents or trying to create a legacy. The Labour Group's budget amendments are a serious and realistic set of proposals to support residents in a safer, fairer and more sustainable Hillingdon. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Puddifoot.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. While I'm pleased that the Labour Group have come to their senses and are no longer opposing the administration's support for an operational police station in Uxbridge, as indeed Councillor Mathers was doing last year, and it still remains on their website, so you might care to remove that if you're concerned about the safety of Hillingdon residents. Our policy remains that our residents will have the lowest council tax rises compared to our neighbouring boroughs, lower rates of fees and charges, and improved facilities. Due to our policy of sound financial management, this has become the norm in Hillingdon year after year, and it really is appreciated by our residents. However, it is useful from time to time for the Labour Group to emphasise the difference between us as regards council tax rises, and I am grateful to them for doing so. However, we will not change our policy, and accordingly we will not support the Labour proposal. We will maintain faith with our residents, who have for many years put their faith in us and continue to do so.
Councillor Bianco, you have the right to reply.
Don't I, Mr. Mayor? Thank you. I was tempted not to say anything, but then there was just too many things I couldn't resist. Mr. Mayor, the only thing that Labour's amendment is going to do for the residents of Hillingdon is make them poorer. Labour's answer to anything is always put up the taxes and let us all be grateful that the cap was set at 2%. I hate to think what they would have done if recommended if the cap had been 5 or even 10%. Who would have bet with me that they wouldn't have gone for the maximum? There's no risk supporting our budget, Mr. Mayor. These services, the services that we have said we will provide. Can Labour say the same? Certainly not. I hate to blow a hole in one of their grand ideas, well, several of their grand ideas really, but one to start with, which is the solar panel feasibility study. One is well underway already, and I'm expecting the report very shortly.
And it doesn't cost 200,000.
And it certainly doesn't cost 200,000. Thank you, Councillor Mills. As to camera doorbells, of which there is a growing number of them, I noticed that when I was canvassing in Hillingdon East only recently. The bit that they seem to have forgotten is if they buy 2,500 as they're proposing, is the 62,500 per annum revenue cost of owning such a doorbell, because they charge annually for the pleasure of having the app. Councillor Dillon, the little bit I did hear of him, and it's unfortunate because normally he's quite entertaining, but I couldn't hear him. Perhaps that's me sitting here and anyway. You've fallen so far out of favour, Councillor Dillon, that I can't hear you anymore. The students, Mr. Mayor, the students are missing tonight because there's a big night in the Students' Union. That's why they're not here. Councillor Eggington advocates a budget based on rumours. Shortage of plumbers in 2021. Well, who knows? There's always chance to retrain. I would advocate it for all accountants, but I know some would be upset by that suggestion. Not long ago, Labour were spreading a rumour that Heathrow would close. So perhaps we should start a rumour suggesting that we'll plant trees on Heathrow when it does close. Or perhaps I should start a rumour that after 2022 there'll be a shortage of Labour councillors. That might also might be a good place to go. But if I were to spread that rumour, does that mean, following Councillor Eggington's logic, that we should allow a few more in now? I don't think so. Mr. Mayor, the amendment is not one we will support. We will stick to the original amendment that I moved, the original motion I moved a few minutes ago. I thank you all.
Councillor Mathers, you have the right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can only assume that Councillor Bianco didn't mention me personally because he agrees with what I was saying and doesn't want to make a joke of it. We won't be making care leavers poorer. We won't be making those on the poorest incomes poorer as they receive council tax discounts. This amendment will make a difference. It will save a considerable amount of interest that we paid on the endless borrowing as we enter that black hole. It will also bring money back into the reserves over the medium term. It will help council tenants save 15% on their energy bills. It will provide grants for community groups to celebrate the diversity that we all enjoy in this borough. There are £20 million of unidentified cuts, 16 million coming from reserves, £12 million being used by 2025 to service debt. This is not sustainable. Hidden cuts are hurting Hillingdon. No tough decisions are being made on the other side. Their heads are down as they burrow away, trying to borrow more and more and more, disappearing into the black hole. And we here wait for action. Wait for action on safety, on the climate, on the youth bus that was promised last year but hasn't appeared. And action to reduce the borrowing so that it's under control. Our amendment provides a safer, fairer and sustainable Hillingdon.
Okay, we now go straight to a recorded vote.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure members will be delighted to be reminded that in accordance with the Local Authority Standing Orders Regulations 2014, recorded votes are taken at the annual budget setting meeting on any motion, amendment to motion or substantive motion regarding the budget. Therefore, I will ask you in turn if you agree are voting for the amendment to the recommendations as set out on pages 8 to 13, against them or abstaining. Councillor Ahmad Walana. I hadn't moved on, so would you? Thank you. Councillor Allen. Councillor Arnold. Councillor Bianco. Councillor Birra. Councillor Bridges. Councillor Brightman. Councillor Burrows. Councillor Chamdell. Councillor Chapman. Councillor Chubadar. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Cawthorne. Councillor Curling. Councillor Dennis. Councillor DeVille. Councillor Dillon. Councillor Dott. Councillor Duncan. Councillor Edwards. Councillor Edgington. Councillor Farley. Councillor Flynn. Councillor Fife. Councillor Fife. Thank you. Councillor Gardner. Councillor Goddard. Councillor Graham. Councillor Hagger. Councillor Hensley. Councillor Higgins. Councillor Herrangi. Councillor Kaufman. Councillor Lewis. Councillor Makwana. Councillor Markham. Councillor Mathers. Councillor Melvin. Councillor Milani. Councillor D. Mills. Councillor R. Mills. Councillor Money. Councillor Morgan. Councillor Morse. Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Oswell. Councillor Palmer. Councillor Prince. Councillor Puddifoot. Councillor Radia. Councillor Riley. Councillor Rodrigues. Councillor Seaman Digby. Councillor Simmons. Councillor Singh. Councillor Stead. Councillor Sweeting. Councillor Tuckwell. Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, that proposed amendment is lost. We now return to the original motion as set out on pages 5 to 8, to which new speakers can speak.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This, Mr. Mayor, is the 18th successive budget I have sat, listened to and participated in. And the amazing thing is that we on this side have had the same leader who has led us and the council through good and catastrophic times when Britain suffered desperately through a Labour government mismanagement that led us to being one of the major effectors of a global recession. I said amazingly because, to my mind, we have come out of the other side better than we went in. If we had taken the standard Labour approach to tax and spend our way out of trouble, we would today have neither reserves or balances, and we would all be living with the appalling frontline services that our neighbouring Labour boroughs suffer. I'm so very thankful that my wife and I chose to move to Hillingdon in 1996, and now that our residents overwhelmingly have chosen the Conservatives to run the council throughout this millennia, and that the Conservative group had the intellect to elect and keep a leader who really understands how to make and implement policies that provide excellent frontline services. Within the budget proposal for my portfolio, there is a priority revenue growth of £677,000, and there is also capital expenditure of £3.75 million for sports clubs across the borough. There is a bid for the repair and regeneration of the historic buildings and landscape at Cranford Park, and £401,000 of additional spend on environmental projects at our cemeteries and crematorium. We will be extending the mortuary in Uxbridge and refurbishing as well as buying equipment and providing live interpretation services at the Bunker and Visitor Centre. We will be continuing to the completion during 2021 of the £3 million refurbishment programme of all our libraries. Excitingly, the new leisure facilities contract and continuing upgrade of our facilities will start in just 4 days' time, which will build on our improved facilities programme whilst returning nearly £1 million of savings through the management fees paid to the council. We are currently at the pre-tender stage of the £32 million contract for the new West Drayton Leisure Centre and Community contract. That's in West Drayton, in the south of the borough. £32 million. There are additional savings of well over £1 million from my portfolio. And increased fees and charges will net an additional £901,000 of income, even though they will be pegged at 90% of our neighbouring boroughs' fees and charges. Mr. Mayor, this is another well thought through, painstakingly precise budget, and I commend it to all members of the Chamber.
Mr. Mayor, just to say to all those who raised their hands, we may not get you in the exact order you raise your hands because it was like a forest going up, but the Mayor's assured me he will make sure everybody who raised their hands will get called. Councillor Mathers, you raised your hand. You can't speak again on the main motion, so I'm sure you've already spoken on the main motion. Thank you.
Councillor Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You will not be surprised to hear, Mr. Mayor, that I stand this evening to support this Conservative administration budget. A budget that provides growth, investment, and most importantly, stability for the residents of Hillingdon, putting them first as the Conservative Party in Hillingdon has done for decades. Within my own portfolio, there are many growth and investment areas, and I will highlight just a few this evening. We have priority growth funding of $113,000 for a planning lawyer to increase the level of specialist knowledge within the legal team, including supporting specific pieces of work around the Heathrow Development Consent Order and Section 106 support. There are a number of increases in parking charges being proposed across the borough for non-residents. However, already alluded to by my colleague who has the speech before all of us cabinet members and takes a lot of our thunder, there will be no parking charging increases for Hillingdon residents yet again. We are also investing in new pay and display machines to stop those who wish to take them away and take the money from doing so. The capital programme investment within my portfolio, Mr. Mayor, is being recognised across the borough in every ward as we continue to resurface roads and upgrade the pavements. And this budget proposes a further investment of £2 million, bringing the total for 2021 to £10 million, with a continued investment of £8 million per annum for the remainder of the capital programme up to and including 24-25. And Mr. Mayor, I am proud that Hillingdon has invested in highway structural works because with the £11.5 million invested in 2019-20, this brings the total programme for the period 2019-20 to 24-25 to a massive £53.5 million, which is the envy of many councils and certainly significantly higher investment than any of our neighbouring boroughs. The capital programme also includes the financing of road safety, which is dear to my heart, as you know, Mr. Mayor, continuing with this Conservative administration, putting all our residents first. Investment in street lighting replacement, £2.8 million. Also, Mr. Mayor, you can see yet again this Conservative administration, under the solid leadership of Councillor Puddifoot, with the number crunching from my esteemed Cabinet colleague, Councillor Bianco, has delivered a budget we can be proud of. A budget that is sound, a budget that puts Hillingdon residents first. I support the budget and commend it to this chamber. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In my role as Cabinet Member for Social Care, Health and Wellbeing, I'm pleased to speak in support of this budget. This council takes a holistic approach to the health and wellbeing of our residents. Our sound financial management, coupled with staff and officer dedication, means we are able to continue to provide a wide service delivery. Allotments, bowling greens, tennis courts, fishing clubs, walking groups are just a few of the places residents can utilise to be physically and mentally active. I recently had the good fortune to accompany Mr. Mayor to our tea dance.
I was pleased to see the huge turnout and was delighted to see a lady aged 100 shaping some moves on the dance floor. Mr. Mayor and I declined to outshine her performance. On a more serious note, dementia affects memory, language, thinking and problem solving. Our support to residents with this disease is with our excellent residential care, and for those in the community we offer Dementia Friends coffee mornings. The introduction of Tafel or magic tables has now been rolled out in 7 of our libraries. It is wonderful to see a meaningful activity for residents with dementia, which is something they can share and experience with their friends and family. Staying in our own home is fundamental to us all where possible. Telecare Line is vital in this aspect, a 24-hour monitoring and alert system that saves lives and supports residents to live independently in their own home. Knowing that someone is there at the push of a button gives residents and their families peace of mind and security. Finally, extra money for services to support residents experiencing the increasing crime of domestic abuse is something I welcome, and thank the leader for his commitment to this service. We have a London Borough of Hillingdon funded independent domestic violence advocacy service which in 2018 managed 751 medium and high risk victims. So far in the first 3 quarters of this financial year, we have managed 534 referrals. Our coffee mornings have been an overwhelming success. We support women and children to leave abusive relationships. They are provided with donations of food, clothing and household necessities. Their children can play safely and the women can support each other whilst doing crafts or just talking. My thanks to the officers who volunteer their time, and to Councillors Gardner, Curling, Oswell, Farley and Bliss for their unwavering support for this project and for their dedication to this cross-party approach. When most councils are dispensing with services, we are delivering new ones. I commend this budget.
Councillor Cawthorne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, the budget, insofar as it affects my restructured portfolio of housing and environment, presents opportunities for us to build on our successes, develop services and improve outcomes while delivering efficiencies over the course of the coming year. The Council has a duty to provide housing advice and assistance, and with our housing partners we have continued to find solutions to either prevent or resolve homelessness by finding alternative and settled accommodation in many cases. We are continuing to reduce the need for families to live in temporary accommodation at a time when many other local authorities have experienced increasing numbers of homeless families presenting in housing need. Our number of households in temporary accommodation is now at a 3-year low and continuing to drop. This has been achieved in part by moving away from the longer-term leased temporary accommodation, and means we've been able to deliver reductions in the need for contingency funding for homelessness. Turning to private sector housing, there is also the introduction of the selected licensing scheme in certain areas of the borough to drive up tenancy and property management standards where there are and have been concerns in the past. As for my new areas of responsibility, priority growth includes funding for a lead officer to support the delivery of new environmental improvement targets and duties associated with the Environment Bill, as well as the development of a corporate approach to our climate strategy. Mr. Mayor, after all these years, with my newer cabinet responsibilities, you might say I stand before you as a living example of the administration's commitment to recycling. We are already among the top performing London local authorities for recycling, among those with weekly refuse collections. And this budget heralds a range of initiatives being implemented to boost recycling rates, not least food recycling. Currently, no less than 30% of general waste currently comprises of food waste. This is a significant opportunity, giving increasing landfill costs and a far more sustainable way to dispose of food waste with fewer emissions and giving us a much very useful end product. Finally, the capital budget for environment includes the provision of pollution screens for schools across the borough. This will complement existing work to raise air quality standards with engine idle enforcement. Mr. Mayor, 3 short minutes means we must be selective necessarily in what we talk about within our portfolios, But our ability to do all these good things, and much more besides, is underpinned by the sound financial management which is a hallmark of this administration. I support the motion, commend the budget to Council. Thank you.
Councillor D. Mills.
Mr Mayor, I fully support this budget which has been moved tonight by my colleagues. I just want to touch upon a couple of things which I think are important to highlight. One is the continuation of our town centre and extension into the shopping parade initiative. We will finish off the work which we've already started in Kings Hill, and we will finish off along Ruislip High Street, but we will be going elsewhere in this borough. Mulberry Parade down in West Drayton and Salisbury Road in Northwood Hills will be the first stops afterwards. And there's more to be done in future, and that is a programme that gives us clear indication of our commitment to our town centres and to our shopping parades and to our residents, and indeed supports the car parking policies which my colleague supports. But I want to spend the rest of my time talking about policing, because there seems to be some misunderstanding or lack of information, and I think it's absolutely important that we go away tonight fully understanding the situation that we have, Mr Mayor. The existing arrangement that we have with the Mayor of London, which started with the previous Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, comes to an end. And the consequence of the changes that Mayor Khan is putting forward actually means that the funding is being reduced to Hillingdon. And the impact of that reduction in funding is that instead of having, as we have and will have on the 31st of March, 2 sergeants and 13 police constables, that will reduce under Mayor Khan to 1 sergeant and 8 officers. So Labour Party may talk about adding an extra 2 coppers. What their mayor is doing is reducing from Hillingdon 1 sergeant and 5 police officers. And that's what they ought to be ashamed about. However, the good news, remember Uxbridge Police Station is closed, but I was in there the other day because it's quite occupied by lots of police, and I was talking to the borough commander. The good news is that the first commitment of the extra 20,000 police officers, and who's committed that? Boris Johnson, is starting to come to fruition. He will have at least 30 new police officers from the summer to be able to support both the response teams and neighbourhood policing. What's more, he also is expecting to get somewhere between an additional 40 and 70 police officers by the autumn to be focused on dealing with violent crime in Hillingdon. So, let's sum this up. The Labour Party amendment, which we quite rightly defeated tonight, was going to cost us more in council tax for 2 extra coppers. By voting for our proposals, we keep the council tax increase lower, but not only do we lose as a result of Mayor Khan, but we get more police officers as a result of the Prime Minister's initiative. That's the difference. That's what supporting residents is all about. That's why this motion of our budget needs to be supported.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm going to focus on the elements of the budget that are part of my portfolio, supporting the children and young people of Hillingdon. Firstly, we continue to have one of the largest school building and expansion programmes in London. As we come to the end of building new primary provisions, that has offered Hillingdon children a high quality learning environment for the best start in life, our focus now is on secondary school places and for children with additional needs. We are proud and will continue to create spaces and facilities fit for modern day teaching and learning and continue to meet the growing demand for school places. In addition, we have recently proposed that our home to school transport service for our children with special educational needs is reviewed as we look at improved route planning and structures. This administration continues to deliver on rising school standards, with the majority of our children in graded good or better schools. In addition, all of our early years settings are graded good or better. This is above the London and UK average. This includes outcomes for vulnerable learners such as children who are looked after and this budget will continue to reach out to help those in most need in our community. In our recent inspection of children's services, Ofsted stated that our services demonstrate innovative approaches and an investment in service which keeps some of the most vulnerable children in our borough safe. Thank you. This budget continues to ensure that our young people have something to do even in the school holidays. The extremely popular Fiesta programme will run this year, not only in the summer, but for the first time it is being piloted for Easter 2020. We continue to offer anyone in Hillingdon with a young child our wide-ranging sports and leisure facilities like our swimming pools and learning to swim sessions, athletic tracks, bike parks, tennis courts, as well as the popular music service, which are to name but a few the facilities for our young people of Hillingdon. For our care leavers, who we are the corporate parents, we continue to resource effective partnerships with many voluntary organisations supported by us to ensure they get the best possible start in adulthood. This year we are changing our semi-independent living accommodation for young people leaving care to more improved facilities and with no reduction in the service. Finally, this budget continues to support adult and community learning for residents who require access to education and is designed to improve their daily lives as well as for others learning new skills and pastimes. I'm very happy to support this budget and commend it to this chamber.
Councillor Curling.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We welcome the investment in support for domestic abuse victims, which I'm glad to say is a subject that transcends party politics in Hillingdon, and it's one of the areas that truly has all party support. With dedicated elected members and equally dedicated and superbly professional officers working together to ensure that victims of all kinds of domestic abuse are supported and the awareness of this horrific subject is raised across the borough. This is genuinely welcome and has Labour's full support. On a lighter note, I would like to welcome the Cabinet's move to the left by embracing some of the previous Labour amendments that they rejected in previous years. In particular, the landlord licensing scheme. So having influenced the Conservative administration's move towards cooperative socialism, we now look forward to the amendments that have just been rejected appearing in next year's budget. We do, however, have a lot of concerns about the sustainability of the budget. The lack of council tax increases for a decade and the failure until now of implementing the social care precept has left something of a black hole in the finances. This, together with an increased reliance on ever-increasing borrowing, means that we're facing the inevitable payback time with the costs of servicing loans threatening the future delivery of services. There's also an increased reliance on the drawdown from balances, which of course can only be used until they eventually disappear. The Labour amendments that have just been rejected prioritise the movement away from the reliance of balances by proposing a modest increase of 4 pence per week in the proposed increase in council tax. Although a modest move, this would at least start the movement away from dipping into balances. Mr. Mayor, for a safer, fairer and more sustainable Hillingdon, the focus of finances needs to be driven by the needs of the borough and its residents, rather than a need for a political statement to be cheaper than our neighbours, vanity projects to leave a legacy and big debts to pay back. So although we will be supporting the budget, we do have severe reservations about the future sustainability without some very difficult decisions being made in the coming years. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sweeting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The budget as presented here tonight I liken to a beautiful rosy apple, as it delivers many things which residents welcome. I welcome, of course, the community facilities planned for my own ward, as my area has long been the cash cow of the council, with little to show for it. So residents may well believe that all is well. However, the apple has the poisonous centre, as the rosy surface disguises the salami slicing of services, which residents may not now notice, but will do until they want to use it, only to find it is lost. A close inspection of the budget would uncover even more reductions to staffing levels and continued swinging cuts to universal youth services, where the budgets have been sliced by some 80% in recent years, so that the council now relies almost solely on the voluntary sector, whilst many of our own youth centres are little used due to staffing cuts, and some are in desperate need of repairs, such as the Northwood Centre. One has to ask whether this policy of continued starvation of budgets is a prelude to the council announcing the closure of some of our local centres. The proposed budget also plans to reduce spending on the expansion of secondary school places at a time when schools are full in Year 7. This lack of spaces is likely to continue as there are, and I say this slowly, more children in our primaries than there are currently places for them in our secondaries. However, the planned reduced spending is probably due to the council's fear that it has borrowed too much to provide primary places, hundreds of which have remained unfilled, an expensive error. Finally, at the core of this budget, we have the council's high borrowing costs, with some 8 million needed to service this debt next year, rising to 20 million in just 4 years' time. But hark, there is even worse to come, with some 20 million of further cuts in the pipeline, and with a budget gap in 5 years' time of some 30 million, with currently, it doesn't seem, any discernible plan B to deal with it. So, residents of Hillingdon, the curtain is therefore lifted on this so-called financially prudent council, as it is a budget possibly built on sand.
Councillor Egerton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Comments have been made by the Conservatives about this being a precise budget. I'm going to ask a question as to why there are a number of charges where Hillingdon residents are, according to the schedule, this is Appendix 8 and Section 15, where residents are being charged between 8 and 25% more than non-residents. Let me go through these. This is to do with the Breakspear crematorium, and the charges, which were the same, have been increased, but according to this schedule, which is part of the budget, this precise budget, the charges for residents are significantly higher than the charges for non-residents. I'm surprised that this hasn't been noticed in such a precise budget. Thank you, Mr.
Councillor Morse.
Dear members, last year the Labour Group highlighted concerns at the level of borrowing by the Council and the continual depletion of reserves. We also questioned the suitability of the Council borrowing money to finance a theatre and a property company that are not part of Council services. I note that in October 2019, Her Majesty's Treasury raised the cost of a Public Works loan bond 50-year new maturity loan from 1.81% to 2.82% overnight. This is obviously increased costs. I then take you back to 2016 and asked a question about the bunker. And I asked why we were not going to actually seek to have this funded by the charity. I now look at it, the bunker is now one of our black holes. It cost us £8 million in capital. And the first year operation, the loss was $336,000. The second year, $558,000, and projected forecast is $633,000. This is colossal. And the total loss will be $1.528 million over 3 years. That's obvious why I asked the question in 2016. This was highly anticipable, and what we should have done is turn it into a chapter and sought other revenue streams. And then I look at this, and what do I see? Another black hole approaching. That was black hole number 1. Black hole number 2 is the theatre. Yeah? Now, This has already expanded from 38 to 44 million and maybe even go even higher. But this is where we have serious concerns about what's happening here. And I would then go back and say, what risk assessment was done on this? And I go back to my central theme for a long time, is there's no scrutiny. If you look at the scrutiny report, which comes out in May, every year it always says no callings. Since 2010, no callings. And our argument has been consistent, that there has to be, when you're investing this level of money, there has to be active scrutiny of decision making, and somebody should be looking at these decisions. Because at the moment, we appear to be okay. We effectively have we are transferring the cost into future generations by borrowing this money now. I mean, only thing I can say that's good about it, the actual budget, is the precept. I think at last we've realised, and we should have charged this precept probably 2 or 3 years ago. We've come in late. We have elderly care needs, and I think that is one aspect of it which we support, but I don't believe it's actually supported by the leader. He reluctantly conceded to that, I suspect, but this should have come in several years ago. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Puddifoot, you reserved your right.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, can I just remind members, because Councillor Puddifoot reserved his right, it's unlimited speaking time.
Thank you. Well, we've heard some twaddle tonight. Mr. Mayor, once again, we're at the time in the municipal year when councils up and down this country are setting their budgets for the year ahead. And as we've heard, tax bills for residents can be increased either by raising council tax up to 1.99%, the social care precept of up to 2%, or both, giving an overall rise of a maximum of 3.99%. On top of this, councils will increase fees and charges for services provided, and over recent years many have supplemented council tax rises with what is termed a stealth tax, such as charging for green waste collections provided to residents. As I've said for a number of years now, whilst it's justifiably arguable that local government has suffered financially to a greater extent than other areas of government, the reality of life is that we have to play the hand that we are dealt to the best of our ability. We have in Hillingdon, since 2010, seen a reduction in central government funding, which together with the additional service requirements due to a population rising at both ends of the age spectrum and inflation, including salary costs, has required this council to achieve, through savings and more efficient working, a reduction in running costs of £142 million. In the coming year, we will need to find a further £9.8 million, and we estimate a further £32.1 million for the years 2021-22, 2022-23, which is why, as we've been doing for many years, we do not prepare annual budgets in isolation, but consider as best possible how we can deal with the challenges that still lay ahead of us through a medium-term financial forecast. And at last, the Labour Party have grasped that, and they're not talking about 1 year. The one thing they have done is to realise that we do it over a period. Tonight, Mr. Mayor, we will freeze council tax for all residents over the age of 65 for the 14th consecutive year. Other residents who have not seen a rise in council tax for 10 years until last year, when they had the lowest council tax rise in London, will be required to pay an additional 1.8%, amounting to 39 pence a week at Band D level. Whilst for the past 4 years we did not levy the social care precept because we did not have to, we could have added an extra 2 or 3% to council tax bills. This year we will raise 2%, 44 pence a week on a Band D property. In practice, this will mean that in total, residents over 65 will at Band D pay an additional 44 pence a week, with those under 65 paying a total local tax bill of 83 pence a week. As I pointed out last year, it's worth considering both the annual and cumulative value to our residents of that tax freeze and the minimal rise over the past 12 or 14 years, based on a comparison with a resident living in a similar area where the council over those periods raised tax by either the retail price index or in later years as allowed by the government. A Hillingdon resident in a Band D property will pay £506 less next year than the resident of that other council, and will over the 12-year period have paid £3,192 less. For those over 65 during the 14-year freeze, the saving next year will be £609, with a cumulative saving over the period of £4,003. Additional spending power of £609 a year for many over 65s living on a fixed income and £506 for many hard-working family households does make a difference. And it's all right the Labour Party trashing that, but this is what the Conservative administration delivers. Unfortunately, as we've heard, unlike his predecessor, the current Mayor of London has not been able to deliver either a freeze or a reduction in the GLA precept. So all Hillingdon Council taxpayers will again have a Mayor of London rise in their tax bills this year of £12 at Band D level. However, Mr Mayor, as I've consistently maintained, setting the council budget is not only about freezing or raising taxes, it is about maintaining service delivery and facilities for residents. And it's worth noting, and I appreciate that my Cabinet colleagues have already mentioned this, but in Hillingdon we have frozen or maintained a minimum level tax rise whilst maintaining frontline services that many councils have not, including a free-to-use weekly waste and recycling collection, including food and green waste, the continuation of a comprehensive library service in our 17 rebuilt or refurbished libraries, including activity programmes with events for all ages, turning them into real community hubs, all of which are again to be refurbished or rebuilt. For our residents over 65, the free burglar alarm scheme, free swimming sessions, free allotments, winter heater loans, and a range of supported outings and parties for clubs and associations. Over 75s continue to receive the telecare line service free of charge, which helps them maintain their independence in their own home. Councillor Eggington, we are investing in a number of climate change initiatives, and we set aside sufficient funds to fight the damage caused to our people and our environment by the Heathrow expansion proposals through the course. Plus an additional £633,000 to manage the cost of responding appropriately to the development consent order. As the faults in the expansion proposal continue to appear, the project will probably be abandoned, but we will always continue to put the well-being of our people and our environment first and provide the resources to fight this scheme for however long it takes to defeat it.
Hear, hear.
We will continue to invest in our award-winning parks and a new map each year for Councillor Bianco. New school buildings, museums, road resurfacing, LED street lighting, new sports facilities and new homes for purchase and rent. The budget and medium-term financial forecast contains provision for a borough museum and a new theatre, a new swimming pool and leisure centre in West Drayton, a new library in Useley, in a development which will include flats for discounted sale to residents and 12 supported housing units and a community facility. Funding for the repair and regeneration of the historic building and landscape of Cranford Park, additional and replacement CCTV cameras, support for local police officers with the funding for the retention of Uxbridge Police Station, funding for facilities for scouts, guides and other youth groups, and for sports clubs, particularly those attended by our younger residents. We will continue the Chrysalis Environmental Improvement Programme and the rebuild or refurbishment of bowls clubs and children's playgrounds. Mr Mayor, these are examples of a level of expenditure in a wide range of areas that are important to our residents that will not be appearing in many council budgets this year.
Hear, hear.
I said earlier that all councils have suffered reductions in government funding over the years, but how many have dealt with that challenge has differed remarkably from what has occurred in Hillingdon. While those around us have closed down facilities, cut services and charged their residents more for basic services, in Hillingdon we have not done so. In fact, in most cases we've done the reverse, building new facilities and improving services, and at the same time building up financial reserves to help with the challenges that lay ahead of us. I will come back to reserves later, but for the moment let me talk a little about fees and charges. In Hillingdon we do not have the stealth tax mentality, charging for green waste collections, etc. As regards our policy on genuine fees and charges, as well as having amongst the lowest parking charges in London, which for residents are again frozen next year, our residents pay fees and charges on other services at 90% of those paid by residents in neighbouring boroughs. From time to time, that does mean that we have to increase our fees and charges pretty substantially because the others are running away with us. And there are occasions where you can look at the schedule and say, oh, that's gone up more than I anticipated, but you need to look at what's going on in our neighbouring three boroughs to get that in perspective. Mr Mayor, again, I referred earlier to the cuts in funding that we as a council have dealt with and what we anticipate still lays ahead of us. To help us deal with these in a business-like and structured manner, rather than the reactive slash-and-burn approach that some councils take, we built up record levels of balances, which at the end of the current financial year will exceed £34 million. And as we've heard, to put this in perspective, Our neighbouring boroughs, Ealing, anticipate to have £15 million, with Harrow and Hounslow 10 million each. At the end of 2022-23, balances will still be £25 million. £25 million. Now, if Councillor Mathers and Councillor Curling are concerned about the level of balances in Hillingdon and finances are not secure in Hillingdon, what on earth are the prospects for our neighbouring boroughs with the minimal balances that they've got? Mr Mayor, the position of our housing revenue account remains very strong, with year-end balances of £17 million and a programme of substantial investment in new general needs and supported living units, as well as repairs and maintenance to existing stock. What we have achieved in Hillingdon has not happened by chance or accident. It takes consistent, strong financial management to achieve what we have in both General Fund and the HRA, and we do that all day, every day, constantly looking at ways of delivering services more efficiently. And our policy of subjecting every area of service activity to the same discipline as regards business improvement delivery, service transformation and zero-based budgeting is something that I promised the staff of this council would happen without fear or favour. It is our steadfast approach to both financial and business management that has set us apart from other councils. And it also sets us apart as an administration from the opposition, who year after year confess to simply not understanding the abilities and disciplines required to do what we have done. And as we've seen tonight, they continue to do so. Mr Mayor, I've said on numerous occasions that what we have achieved and continue to achieve in Hillingdon is frankly remarkable. I would like to thank my Cabinet colleagues, particularly Councillor Bianco, and all members of the Conservative group who, in one way or another, are making this happen. Could I also thank two officers, the Finance Director Paul Wayman and the Deputy Chief Executive Jean Palmer, who deal so efficiently with the initiatives and queries that they receive on a very regular basis relating to financial matters and business delivery improvements. And again, as I did last year, I also thank the staff of this council. We now have some of the best staff in local government who, with very few exceptions, provide excellent services to our residents, day in, day out. Mr Mayor, we do not underestimate the financial challenges that we as a council still have to deal with. And it's never been more important than now to have hands-on, strong leadership and sound financial management ability running this council. In Hillingdon, the Conservative administration have a proven record of management and financial ability, and it is this that enables us to continue to put our residents first, our people, our environment, our heritage, or aspects of service delivery that are underpinned by the proposals in this budget. Mr Mayor, this is a first-class budget for a first-class borough. I'm delighted to formally second it.
Councillor Bianco, you have the right to reply.
I do. Mr Mayor, I shall be brief. So many positive things have been said on this side of the chamber. I'd like to congratulate all my colleagues on filling out in much more detail what this budget will deliver for our residents. Mr Mayor, this is a sound budget that will deliver good quality services to all of our residents. Mr Mayor, I commend it to the Chamber and I look forward to it receiving unanimous support.
Okay, we now move to the vote.
Yes, Mr Mayor, the final recorded vote of the evening. I should be asking members if they're voting for the Cabinet budget recommendations as set out on pages 5 to 8, as moved by Councillor Bianco, seconded by Councillor Puddifoot, against or abstaining. Councillor Ahmad Wulana. Councillor Allen. Councillor Arnold. Councillor Bianco. Councillor Birra. Councillor Bridges. Councillor Brightman. Councillor Burrows. Councillor Chamdale. Councillor Chapman. Councillor Chubadar. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Cawthorne. Councillor Curling. Councillor Dennis. Councillor DeVille. Councillor Dillon. Councillor Dott. Councillor Duncan. Councillor Edwards. Councillor Edgington. Councillor Farley. Councillor Flynn. Councillor Fife. Councillor Gardner. Councillor Goddard. Councillor Graham. Councillor Hagger. Councillor Hensley. Councillor Higgins. Councillor Hurangi. Councillor Kaufman. Councillor Lewis. Councillor Makwana. Councillor Markham. Councillor Mathers. Councillor Melvin. Councillor Milani. Councillor D. Mills. Councillor R. Mills. Councillor Money, Councillor Morgan, Councillor Morse, Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Oswell, Councillor Palmer, Councillor Prince, Councillor Puddifoot, Councillor Radia, Councillor Riley, Councillor Rodrigues, Councillor Seaman-Digby, Councillor Simmons, Councillor Singh, Councillor Stead, Councillor Sweeting, Councillor Tuckwell, Madam Deputy Mayor, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, that budget is carried unanimously.
That brings us to the end of the meeting. I hope most of you, or in fact all of you, if you'd like to come and join us down in the Mayor's Parlour for a glass of ale or a glass of whatever you want, water and some food.